Hey, night owls! Tuck yourself beneath that blanket of yours and slide the brightness on your screen down to just enough to see. We're cracking open another dust-caked door in the attic of forgotten history, and this one squeaks louder than a rat on a cheese bender. Before we shuffle inside, do me a stealthy favor. Tap that thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and slip a comment below telling me what clutter monster currently lives in your own closet. It's fun seeing where everyone's watching from, and honestly, your comments keep the algorithmic gremlins fed. Cool? Cool. Now gently pull that imaginary latch because we're stepping into a cramped, smoky, medieval cottage so stuffed with odds, ends, and outright nonsense, you'll wonder how the inhabitants even found space to breathe. Picture it. A thatch roof hut balanced like a crooked tooth on a muddy lane somewhere in late 14th century England. Twilight leaks through gaps in the wattle and daub walls, staining the interior a deep, sleepy amber. And you are ducking under the low lintel, careful not to smack your head on the dangling pig bladders that function as makeshift lanterns. The first thing you notice isn't the stale smell of peat smoke or the faint reek of goat. It's the avalanche-level clutter. The place looks less like a home and more like a dragon's hoard, curated by someone with zero spatial awareness and a compulsive need to keep everything. On the floor, battered chests overflow with bent iron nails, cracked spoons, dented helmets, orphan shoes, and the occasional dead mouse that crawled in hoping for warmth and never clawed its way back out. Suspended from rafters are long-dried bundles of herbs, nettles, mugwort, yarrow, twined around strips of linen that once served as bandages but are now crunchy with age. An entire row of wooden trenchers, the medieval version of plates, balances on a beam overhead like dominoes, ready to fall. If one tumbles, the rest will clatter down with all the subtlety of a church bell at matins. Our host is a wiry woman named Wulfhild. She's 50 if she's a day, but those creases cut into her cheeks read more like 70. Her husband, Osric, left for the next shire years ago with a cart of turnips and simply never returned. Either because he perished in a ditch, or because he realized living in this labyrinth of trinkets was more dangerous than jousting blindfolded. Wulfhild, however, has remained, nursing a steadfast belief that everything can be useful. Broken spindle could wedge a door. Rotted leather jerkin, perfect scarecrow stuffing. A rusted horseshoe snapped in half might serve as a weight on the end of a fishing line. And so she keeps it all, layering object upon object until the cottage walls bulge outward like cheeks packed with acorns. Move near the hearth. Mind the goat skull propped against the logs. She swears it keeps sprites from stealing embers. And you'll see three-legged stools piled one atop another, forming a shaky tower of potential seating that nobody dares disturb, lest the entire interior collapse like poorly set jelly. In the corner squats a barrel filled not with ale, but with water-logged animal bones. She boils those on rainy evenings, claiming the marrow makes broth that cures melancholy of the spleen. Next to that, wrapped in a fraying wool cloak, 16 wooden toys, headless knights, chipped horses, a spinning top that no longer spins. She hasn't had children in years. Her only daughter ran off to a monastery scriptorium. But Wulfhild can't discard the toys. They hold laughter, she says. Laughter is rare. Best keep it close. The hoarding mindset. though they'd never call it that, makes brutal sense in a world where everything is costly and tomorrow's crop could fail thanks to a bad frost or a marauding band of sheep. People saved scraps because scraps meant survival. A cottage like Wolfhild's became an ark against uncertainty. Each cracked cup another plank keeping life afloat. That said, practicality gradually mutates into obsession. Somewhere between save twisted iron to repair a plow and stash 42 cracked pots because maybe the king will ask for broken pottery, the line disappears. Wolfhild crossed it long ago, and now she belongs to the clutter as much as it belongs to her. Creep farther along the single narrow aisle. Don't trip on the antlered helmet underfoot. She found it after a skirmish and insists its ghost of courage warms the house. You'll reach the sleeping space. I hesitate to call it a bed. It's a straw pallet sandwiched between sacks of barley, a warped spinning wheel, and 3 woven baskets filled with goose feathers. She sleeps pinned like a scroll between stone weights. Above her droops a lattice of ropes hung with drying fish. If one rots through the cord at night and plummets, well, hope she's a heavy sleeper. Here's the secret, though. Burying oneself in belongings brought comfort that no priest's sermon could replicate. Each item whispered, "You'll need me someday." And who were they to argue when survival hinged on making do? Their neighbors might call them magpie hearts, but ironically, come famine, guess who shows up begging for a spare ladle or a rag to bind a wound? Right, those same neighbors. Now, you'd expect such squalor to drive pests into ecstatic reproduction. And you'd be right. This cottage hosts a rat colony so established it's practically a vassal state. The rodents scuttle through ceiling thatch, swan diving into sacks of grain, nibbling, nesting, multiplying. Wolfhild tries folk remedies, smearing goose grease around holes, rats slip, apparently, planting mint sprigs, they're supposed to hate the scent, hanging dried cat skins, morbid but fearsome. None of it works. But getting rid of food scraps? Sacrilege. That half-gnawed cheese rind is tomorrow's dinner. Thank you very much. Step toward the doorway again. Watch the shelf of candlesticks carved from tallow and hardened with ash. They're an inch from sliding off when someone breathes too hard. Daylight is nearly gone, yet the cottage is already twilight dim because grime coats the tiny windows like a permanent eclipse. She keeps shards of deer bladder ready to patch holes if glass cracks. Glass is rare, brittle, and precious. Better to store every fragment, just in case. Let's shuffle over to the makeshift workbench. 2 cracked barrel staves propped on stones. Here lies a trove of copper pins, half-finished embroidery, horsehair string, and countless feathers. She intends to craft arrow fletchings for which she owns no arrow shafts. It's the intention that matters. In her mind, these loose ends form a grand tapestry of potential. The fact that it rarely manifests? Details, details. By now, the low ceiling feels lower, as if the objects themselves exhale and eat the oxygen. Your head swims with scents: tar, stale grain, lard, mildew, a potpourri of persistence. Yet Wolfhild hums, her voice a gentle rasp, utterly content. She doesn't see chaos, she sees security. The outside world is unpredictable. Lords levy taxes, soldiers recruit sons, weather kills livestock. Inside, she controls everything by owning everything. Or maybe everything owns her. Sometimes the difference blurs. Unsurprisingly, the parish priest labels her cottage a den of earthly attachment. He preaches about moth and rust, urging folks to store treasure in heaven, not in barns. Wolfhild listens, nods politely, then returns home, picks up a cracked pewter cup, and mumbles, "Rust's no worry if you oil it." Spiritual lectures can't compete with the tangible promise of a future use. Remember, too, that medieval hoarding isn't purely individual quirk. It's cultural muscle memory. Generations survive plague, war, and fire by salvaging. A charred piece of timber becomes a stool leg. A bishop's discarded robe lines a cradle. A snapped sword hilt becomes a sturdy hook. Waste is sin when scarcity haunts daily life. The medieval mind measures wealth not by coin alone, but by the heap of things that might someday keep death outside the door. But this accumulation comes at a price. Fires start easily when stray sparks land on straw baskets wedged against the hearth. Parasites breed in the folds of stored blankets. A neighbor trips over a rusty scythe blade lying underfoot and sues in the manorial court. The reeve fines Wolfhild for blocking the lane with heaps spilling out her door. Still, she refuses to purge. Tonight, as moonlight pries through smoke holes, the cottage creaks with the weight of its secrets. Wolfhild will douse the embers, slip between barley sacks, and dream not of open meadows, but of another cracked pitcher she spotted at market and must bring home. And you, inching toward the exit, suddenly understand why future centuries invent minimalist philosophies. Because ancestor cottages like this feel like vaults where hope and fear clutter together until you can't tell which is which. Step outside into crisp night air. Breathe. Stretch. Feel how wide the world seems without beams drooping overhead. Yet remember, every modern thrift store binge, every attic jammed with holiday decor, every "I might need this someday" instinct, that's Wolfhild whispering through time. Hoarding isn't just medieval, it's human. And maybe, just maybe, beneath her mountain of objects lies the same anxious heartbeat we carry in our Amazon wish lists. Slip off your muddy boots at the threshold. Trust me, you'll need the grip of bare toes for the balancing act ahead. And duck back inside Wolfhild's world. Because tonight, we're climbing the leaning tower of stuff that's wedged above her rafters. Quick housekeeping. If you like wandering through cramped corners of forgotten history with me, click the subscribe bell so you don't miss the next midnight ramble. And drop a comment. What's the single strangest item you own but refuse to toss? I read every reply while sipping oat beer at ungodly hours, and your stories keep these episodes crackling. Ready? Good. Grab the dangling rope. Yes, the one plaited from horsehair and leftover bowstring, and haul yourself toward the loft. Up here, the air is hotter, smokier, and so thick with dust motes, the moonlight looks like a silver waterfall. The floorboards aren't really boards, they're crooked planks laid atop ceiling beams, so each step feels like crossing a bridge that was never finished. Your head brushes bundles of flax and nettle seeds that jingle in their pods like warning rattlesnakes. And there, huddled beneath a slanted roof, waits the attic's crown jewel, the winter pile. The winter pile is medieval insurance incarnate. It's everything Wulfhild deems too precious or too flammable to keep near the hearth, yet too useful someday to discard. Picture conical stacks of woolen hose whose toes have long since worn through, but might still line a boot or wrap a blistered heel. Imagine a broken spinning wheel blade. Sharpened, it becomes a scythe. Flattened, it serves as a fireplace poker. Nearby, a hessian sack spills sheep droppings, painstakingly sifted for undigested grain, a last-ditch emergency seed stock, she claims. Next to that, a row of warped pewter plates stands on end like gloomy soldiers, each etched with a family crest so faded you can't tell lions from cabbages. Yet the real treasures are the texts. Yes, books, or rather fragments of them. Not shimmering, illuminated manuscripts, but cast-off leaves from miscopied sermons, legal writs scraped clean for palimpsest, and brittle parchment receipts. Wulfhild can't read a letter, but she swears the pattern of inked lines wards off mildew and mice when wedged between roof slats. She's basically wallpapered the attic in medieval bureaucracy. In one corner lies a brittle indenture, land boundaries from 6 reigns ago, now serving as a hammock for the resident cat. The cat's name? Paige. Wulfhild climbs up behind you, joints crackling louder than the ladder. In her hand, a stub of tallow candle sputtering. "Mind the rafter," she murmurs. "It wobbles if you breathe ill will." You're fairly sure she isn't joking. She points to a crate overflowing with shards of green-glazed pottery. "That," she says, "is a future greenhouse." You blink. She explains, one day, when she's secured a small patch of land, she'll embed the shards around seedling trenches to capture warmth. Never mind that she's 70% sure greenhouses require glass, not pottery splinters. The idea of heat retention is enough. In the spirit of archaeology, you kneel by another heap. Tangled ropes, boat nails, half a coracle paddle. Wulfhild's cottage sits 40 miles from the sea. "May driftwood itself find its master," she quotes, tapping the paddle. Perhaps she plans to build a rain barrel, or a sled, or a giant spoon. Possibility is oxygen here. But hoarding has tiers: private, semi-public, and communal. Wulfhild may be queen of this attic, yet she trades portions of her cash. Every saint's feast day, villagers wander in with barter sacks, swapping surplus rye or a tin cup for whatever weird bit they think will fill a household gap. She once traded 3 cracked chamber pots for a cured pig's bladder, remarkably watertight, then used it as a bellows skin. A neighbor still tells the story of buying an iron candlestick that later turned out to be a broken spade handle painted with lampblack. Caveat emptor, medieval style. Speaking of neighbors, let's step, careful now, across the beam toward the adjoining loft of Gunilda the baker. Medieval cottages often shared walls, and smells bleed through like gossip. Gunilda's side is a flour dust paradise. Neatly stacked sacks, sieves hung in orderly rows, and only a few backup items. An extra peel, a spare grindstone wedge. You'd think she's normal until you spot the bread doll she keeps hidden under a straw mat. A 3-year-old loaf molded into an effigy of King Edward. She saved it from a coronation feast, convinced the royal blessing baked in and will preserve her ovens from misfortune. If you poke it, it crumbles like ancient plaster. Gunilda shrieks if anyone suggests tossing it. Even tidy people harbor their talismans. Back to Wulfhild's domain. She leads you to a crate labeled, in crooked charcoal scrawl, "Breath for Bad Spirits." Inside, glass vials filled with goose fat mixed with rosemary, little fat candles floating inside. She sets one beside you, lights it, inhales. The scent is interesting. Think poultry stew crossed with pine. She insists burning one each new moon suffocates night sneezers, supernatural beings blamed for sleep paralysis. Does it work? Hard to prove. But she sleeps soundly beneath fish corpses and goat skulls, so maybe. Now, here's a twist. Hoarding isn't always solitary. Monastic libraries did it on an institutional scale. Every scrap of parchment, every copy of Augustine, every miscellaneous sermon about geese representing charity got chained to shelves. Castles stockpiled rusting armor from generations of knights. Town councils kept barrels of obsolete weights and measures just in case. The medieval world's survival instinct bred attic kingdoms everywhere. Imagine, for contrast, a castle tower you visited last video. Its armory floor sagged under heaps of obsolete weapons, flails with missing chains, cracked shields, crossbows missing prods. Why didn't they melt the iron down? Because forging required monstrous amounts of charcoal and labor. Easier to keep the old blade. One day a smith might patch it. Same with clothing. Even king's garments were handed to servants, then to scullions, then cut into patches for chamber pots. Nothing truly died, just metastasized into new purpose. Back in the attic, you notice Wulfhild's accounting system. She ties colored string around items, red for repair, blue for trade, yellow for ritual. The strings themselves? Unraveled from an old bishop's altar cloth she found in a ditch. She mentions this while tightening a knot around a cracked wooden ladle designated red. You glimpse dozens of red strings. Repairs rarely happen here. Categorizing is the victory. Of course, danger lurks in overaccumulation. One rogue spark and the winter pile becomes a funeral pyre. The thatch roof is thirsty. Embers drift like malicious fireflies. Wulfhild knows the risk. She hangs a leather bucket of rainwater from a beam, keeps a long broom by the ladder, recites a prayer to Saint Florian every dusk. But letting go, harder than risking flames. Night deepens. Candles gutter. Wulfhild yawns, gestures you back down. Crossing the threshold, your eyes adjust to starlight. The cottage silhouette bulges like a hunchback under the weight of stored centuries. The moral: we modern folk shove memories into cloud drives. Medieval peasants shoved memories under rafters. Same instinct, different clutter. One day, archaeologists will comb abandoned servers and marvel at our digital hoards of unread emails and duplicate selfies. As you trek away on squeaky boots, take a final backward glance. Inside, Wulfhild's candle flickers through a crack, painting the lane with a thin sliver of gold. She's humming again, an off-key lullaby to reassure her belongings they're safe for the night. And maybe to reassure herself that as long as the cottage is full, her life, too, is full. The back plot is no bigger than a kitchen rug, yet every inch is colonized by objects that never quite made it into the house. Picture a waist-high barricade of cartwheels, each hub wrapped in rope to keep the spokes married, Wolfhild says, as though the wheels might divorce under a moonless sky. Wedged between them are warped barrel staves stacked like mislaid dominoes. She plans to fashion rain gutters from them one day. Until then, they lean together in wooden camaraderie, sprouting moss that glows pale green whenever lightning flashes. To your left, the metal pile squats like a sullen dwarf. Rusted cauldrons, fractured plowshares, bent sword blades, and a mysterious iron hook so big it could yank Leviathan from the sea. A smith passes through twice a year, cart jangling, looking for scrap to melt down. But Wolfhild haggles furiously, unwilling to part with more than a few nail bits. She swears that hook might suit a well bucket or a windlass or perhaps an anchor for Noah's Ark when the next flood comes. Hyperbole aside, medieval hoarders were half survivalists, half prophets of doom. Tomorrow could bring plague, invasion, or the last trumpet, and you'd better have spare iron if you expected to rebuild civilization by supper. Duck under a line of drying rabbit pelts stretched between two poles. No, scratch that. One pole is an upturned spear shaft, the other a snapped oar. They're bound with horse gut, proof that nothing organic goes to waste. Every skin becomes patching leather, every sinew potential cordage. Even the brittle tufts of fur Wolfhild plucks from the pelts are stuffed into pillowcases. Cotton's too dear, fur dust will do. She's convinced soft headrests chase away night demons of choking, what we'd call apnea. Medicine or superstition? In this century, difference is moot. Step carefully over the row of glass vessels half buried in soil like lurking jellyfish. Each one tumbles out of the garbage middens behind the manor house up the road. Broken? Sure, but shards refract sunlight into the herb beds, warming seedlings earlier in spring. That's her theory. In practice, they mostly slice ankles, hence the rag-wrapped stones positioned as warning beacons. Between those hazards, improbable greenery thrives. Stray leek tops, volunteer nettles, a single twisted apple sapling waited to grow horizontally so she can harvest fruit without climbing. That sapling's branches are tied with rags the color of damp clay. Scraps of an old monk's robe she scavenged after storm winds tore laundry from the priory line. She claims the robe retained holy vigor, making apples immune to worms. Empirical proof? 0. Faith? 100%. Beyond the sapling stands the kiln that isn't. What looks like a collapsed stone beehive is really a half-built bread oven Wolfhild started the year the plague took her niece. She lugged shale blocks from a creek bed, got as far as waist height, then ran out of mortar. Lime cost 2 hens a sack. Rather than dismantle it, she topped the unfinished dome with a thatch blanket and calls it her outdoor cupboard. She stores grain inside, trusting that the plague death sealed the stones with sorrow, which rats respect. Do they? Judging by the gnawed barley kernels sprinkled around the base, not so much. But admitting defeat is not a hoarder's way. The cupboard remains, testament to industrious grief. Leaks from this chaotic patio, however, are not contained by property lines. Follow the thread of clutter into the lane, and you discover a makeshift market at dawn. Villagers know Wolfhild will barter anything, and because trade fairs are miles away, her alleyway becomes a kind of unofficial swap meet every new moon. A shepherd with a three-legged stool to mend might swap fleece for Wolfhild's chipped loom rates. A brewer may trade sour ale for one of her cracked cauldrons, which he re-smelts into a spigot. Even the reeve's wife once bartered a pot of gooseberry jam for Wolfhild's stash of dried lavender that still held the faint whiff of goat dung. The jam vanished in pies. Nobody died. Medieval immune systems, forged in filth, stronger than forged iron. Let's pause under the arch of an ancient doorframe propped against her fence. It was salvaged from a burned tithe barn and now leans like a portal to nowhere. She intends to embed it in a hedgerow someday, so fairies may pass without vexing the cattle. You'd laugh, but local cowherds did suffer a rash of strange gashes mysteriously after the tithe barn blaze. Crediting sprites or sharp thistles, same result. You protect your animals. She paints the lintel with quicklime each Candlemas, renewing the barrier. The real miracle is that rain hasn't dissolved it yet. Notice, too, the audio landscape. Clinks, clanks, the swish of straw, occasional clang of falling tin. Hoards make music. At night, wind whistles through the hollow beams, producing a ghostly chord that likely birthed more than one specter tale in the village. Children dare each other to sneak here after dark. Most flee at the first metallic groan, convinced a restless soul rattles chains. Wolfhild simply thanks the wind for tuning her scrap. Now, let's shift perspective. Imagine you're the new bailiff sent by the manor lord to audit crop yields. You stride down the lane, quill tucked behind ear, tally sheet in hand. Suddenly, carts can't pass because of a barricade of rotting yokes Wolfhild laid out to air. You order them removed. She pleads for 3 days. She means to scrape off the rot and salvage the iron collars. Legally, the lane is common ground. Practically, no villager wants a feud with the woman whose attic hides half their borrowed tools. Diplomacy prevails. Bailiff sidesteps, mutters about peasant eccentricities, and the lane stays blocked another fortnight. Occasionally, the hoard tangles with theology. The local vicar preaches cleanliness of soul and space. He leads a Corpus Christi procession right past Wolfhild's fence. Children scatter petals, choristers chant. Yet the overwhelming stink of tarred rope and stagnant duck pond drift from her barrels, making choir boys gag. Parish gossip soon paints her as borderline heretic, hoarding relics of a material world. She counters by donating a length of frayed altar cloth, retrieved from her attic, naturally, to patch the church roof. Gift accepted. Tongues quiet for now. But hoarding isn't exclusively physical. Listen as Wolfhild recites herbal recipes from memory. Fennel for flatulence, ash leaves for fever, onion skins for prophecy. Each line is an item stored in her mental attic. Medieval culture prizes oral stockpiling, saints' days, planting lore, folk cures, because parchment costs salvation. Thus, a hoarder's mind resembles the cottage, crowded, layered, occasionally contradictory. Losing a memory is like losing a pot. Better to keep all, even cracks. Which brings us to a darker truth. Where there's hoarding, there's guilt. Some nights, when wood smoke settles low and stars dust the thatch, Wolfhild whispers to the heap, "Forgive me." For what? For storing that pig iron instead of selling it to buy medicine for her dying niece? For clutching broken toys instead of letting them comfort another child? Hoards preserve not only hope, but regret, each object fossilizing a choice unmade. She can't discard them without reliving the what-ifs. You might feel the urge to tidy, to spark joy this mess. Don't. Medieval hoards obey a delicate gravity. Remove one cracked jug and a dozen others adjust, shift, tumble. Economies of salvage collapse. Wolfhild's cottage is a Jenga tower. Touch the wrong block, everything falls. It's nearly dawn now. A rooster down the lane, cough, crows. Wolfhild pours you a parting sip of nettle beer, ladled from a crock with a chipped rim. She offers it with ritual seriousness. Hospitality trumps embarrassment. You sip. Taste? Thin, earthy, surprisingly sweet. She beams. The sweetness comes from honey scraped out of combs 3 summers ago, extracted by soaking wax in warm water because new honey costs too much. Yes, even beverages here are hoarded echoes. Stepping away, you realize sunlight brushes the horizon. Every gleam highlights edges of tools, bowls, bones, making them look almost golden. For a fleeting heartbeat, the hoard resembles treasure. And maybe that's the secret. Value isn't universal, it's contextual. In Wolfhild's world, a cracked ladle is life insurance, a broken door frame a fairy gate, a sack of bones a winter stew. She is wealthy in futures, if not in coin. So, night owls, after sharing this claustrophobic carnival of salvage, ask yourself, what do you keep that outsiders deem junk? Drop it below. Maybe your clutter is a talisman against tomorrow too. Smash that like button if you survived the balancing beams, and ring the bell so the algorithm spirits know to deliver our next midnight tale. Right. Tighten your cloak against the moss-cold air and follow the torch glow down a sagging ramp of oak planks. Beneath almost every medieval settlement lurked some version of the common dump pit, part landfill, part wishing well, part evidence locker. Here, a dozen cottages, including Wolfhild's, share one slumped hollow. Above, you would swear nothing occupies this meadow but rushes and grazing geese. Below, centuries ferment. The ground exhales a cocktail of mushroom damp, horse urine, and ghostly linen starch. Wolfhild lowers herself via a rope ladder woven from decommissioned harp strings. No joke, the Lord's harper snapped his frame during a Yuletide jig, and she salvaged the cords before they hit the fire. Their twang still lingers if you bounce too hard. She mutters a quick charm, "Earth keep what sky forgets," and leads on. Your first discovery is the chamber pot layer, a stratum of glazed earthenware whose contents long ago leached into the peat, leaving brittle pots shaped like deflated pumpkins. Why store them here? Because medieval recycling begins with excrement. Mixed with ash, the slurry becomes saltpeter for black powder or fertilizer for flax. Wolfhild prizes cracked pots. She chips shards into wedges that hold open beehive vents, claiming the residual ammonia repels wax moths. Practical or putrid? Both. Deeper in, torchlight reveals slabs of bone-white tallow stacked like cheese wheels. In famine years, villagers boiled every scrap of animal fat into candles, soap, or waterproofing grease. These slabs represent overstock from a winter when the plague thinned mouths faster than larders. Now they age to a waxy amber, dense as marble. Wolfhild chips off shavings to seal roof seams. She swears old tallow flexes with heat better than fresh beeswax. She pays in gossip, 1 scoop of plague-era fat for 2 rumors about next market's wool prices. Hunkered down, the ceiling dips. This chamber is lined with shields, splintered roundels whose paint flaked off ages ago. A local reeve ordered them replaced after a disastrous levy where arrows punched through like pastry. Rather than burn them, villagers nailed them as rat baffles along trench walls. Each shield bears scars, spear holes, sword notches, black scorch marks. Kneel and you can read forgotten skirmishes like Braille. Wolfhild traces one gouge lovingly. It belonged to her father. Keeping it here means the story holds safe, neither flaunted nor forgotten. Ready for the more macabre shelf? Duck beneath a dangling curtain of dried hog bladders, semi-transparent balloons rattling in drafts. On the far side squats the ossuary nook. Farmers once dug up human bones while plowing an abandoned churchyard. No funds for reinterment, no heart to toss them aside. They bundled tibias and skulls and brought them here, stacking them like cordwood. Wolfhild ties rag tags to each femur, inked with the saint's day when it surfaced. She believes counting bones keeps the village's living census honest. We reckon the gone, so the born don't go missing. Some nights she presses an ear to the ossuary, swearing she hears soft veld chants guiding lost infants to the right wounds. Whether eerie or comforting, the bones stay. Farther in, the pit widens into a natural cavern where groundwater pools waist-deep. Along its banks rise barrels sealed with resin, the ale graveyard. Each keg contains brew spoiled by wild yeast or contaminated by dung fleas. Undrinkable, but explosive if the hoops burst. Locals shump them here to vent carbonic rage in darkness. Wolfhild calls this place the Cave of Bitter Sermons because once a month a barrel pops with a cannon crack that rattles pewter plates up in her attic. She claims the echoes warn her when to mend roof tiles. Pressure underground hints at pressure above. Sound physics? Doubtful. Yet she hasn't lost a shingle in 10 years. Lift your lantern. See those honey gold flecks embedded in the muck? Not metal, resin pearls. When the church renovated its rood screen, builders scraped off flaking gold leaf and pine resin, rolling the sticky crumbs into marble-sized beads. Rather than discard them, sacrilege, they buried them here among tallow slabs, trusting future craftsmen might melt them into varnish. Wolfhild occasionally pries one out, grinds it with charcoal, makes a crude pitch to waterproof shoe soles. Walking on sanctified resin supposedly blunts the devil's thorns. At least it keeps feet dry. Listen. A faint clatter approaches. Lanterns bob at the tunnel mouth. Rag and bone men. 2 gaunt figures, cloaks patched with dog hide, pushing hand carts fitted with iron grates. They visit after midnight, rifling through pits for saleable refuse, brass buttons, lace offcuts, glass beads. Guild law bans them from daylight trade inside walls, so the pit becomes their marketplace. Wolfhild barters glazed pot shards for a fistful of rusty keys. They'll fit nothing in her cottage, but she says keys ward cramps if worn on a string around the neck. Negotiation is quick, hushed. Items change hands.
Tokens minted from pressed bone meal shift pockets. You sense an underground economy alive as any fair, value measured not by gloss but by possibility. One bone picker offers Wolfhild a surprise, a vellum scrap bearing 3 lines of Greek. He can't read, she can't either, but foreign letters are amulets against lightning. They settle on a trade. She gives him a cracked pewter spoon rumored to have stirred royal gruel decades ago. Provenance? Imagination? Enough to seal the deal. Trade finished. The rag and bone men vanish deeper into tunnels. Wolfhild tucks the vellum under her kirtle. For the ridge beam, she says. Greek keeps storms polite. You wonder, is hoarding really about objects or about stories glued to them like barnacles? Remove the tail and the spoon becomes scrap. Remove the spoon, the tale becomes legend untethered. Hoarding preserves both. Torch sputters. You climb a rubble ramp toward fresh air. At the exit, Wolfhild pauses beside a heap of half-burned ash logs, the pit's crematorium. In plague years, villagers torched bedding, clothing, sometimes whole thatch roofs to cauterize infection. The ashes are still faintly caustic. She scoops them into a cloth. Mixed with lard, they form lye soap strong enough to peel skin. Perfect for scrubbing lice combs. Before dawn haze lightens the sky, she leads you back to her cottage, lugging the ash sack, keys jangling, Greek scrap fluttering at her breast. You glance over your shoulder, the pit's entrance already swallowed in morning fog, a secret mouth that belches centuries. But its influence rises with her, in ash soap that stings, in resin sealing boots, in bone beads rattling like dice. You've witnessed how a village survives by burying its past just deep enough that anyone desperate can still dig. As chickens start their half-hearted crow and crows scold the sky, Wolfhild resumes her attic rota. She'll catalogue the new keys, decide whether the vellum belongs under the ridge or inside a shoe, and stow the ash where no child will touch it. Her hoard grows by inches, as steady as sunrise. Straight ahead, Wolfhild's ceiling forest bristles, beams braced with scavenged rafters, each one wrapped in layers of salvaged cloth. At a glance, they look like sleeping bats. In truth, they're contraband reliquaries rolled tight as burritos. 3 winters back, traveling monks hawked bone splinters of an alleged martyr, 2 coppers per shard. Villagers bought the lot, then panicked when a rival parish threatened to report relic fraud. Solution? Hide the evidence until tempers cooled. Wolfhild volunteered her rafters. She's not sure which fragments are holy and which are goat knuckle, but she figures prayers stick as well to one as the other. Beneath the beam bundles sits an armoire of orphaned doors. No 2 panels match. Each bears hinge scars from demolished cottages. Medieval carpenters treated doors like portable savings accounts. Good oak planks outlived several houses. When a barn collapsed, enterprising souls salvaged its door, shaved it down, rehung it elsewhere. Wolfhild couldn't stand the waste of unmatched strays, so she built a cabinet entirely from them. Pull a random door and you might find a stash of iron nails carefully straightened after extraction from a burned guild hall. She keeps them sorted by length like crude piano keys. On feast days, she sells handfuls for quick coin. On lean days, she melts them into lumpy weights for her loom. Near the chimney stack crouches the book cradle, a latticed crate lined with lamb's wool, holding manuscripts too singed, worm-eaten, or heretical for the parish scribe to risk public flames. Pages curl like dying leaves. One codex in crabbed Carolingian hand seems to be a romance, but every third line replaced by blank space. Ink scraped off for reuse. Wulfhild says the missing words migrate at night and whisper themselves into new stories. She listens while carding flax. She can't read, but she swears the rhythm changes depending on moon phase. Proof that tales survive even stripped bare. Feel that vibration? Floorboards hum under your boots. The nail press in action. Wulfhild rigged a foot treadle contraption from a wine press screw. She drops bent roofing spikes into the hopper. Each stomp drives a wedge that re-straightens shanks against an anvil plate. The clang is muffled by straw stuffed between joists, so neighbors assume she's pounding butter. Recycled nails rebuild pig pens after storms. Cheaper than buying new iron, which costs a hen per dozen. Every nail bears faint bends. She calls them storm lines, believing wood grips better if the metal remembers hardship.
Scoot sideways. Don't knock the basket of glass teeth. These translucent triangles were once cathedral window shards hammered loose by hail. Under penalty of excommunication, no layman could possess stained glass, so glaziers sold rejects at night to folk who ground them into pigment or pressed them into candle molds for festive sparkle. Wulfhild discovered another use. She glues pears back to back with pine pitch, threads twine through, and dangles them in the goat's doorway. When dawn hits, rainbow flecks scatter, allegedly scaring flies. Whether superstition or science, her goats boast the cleanest hides in 3 shires. Against the far wall, a knee-high crate emits a metallic musk, the grave goods coffer. Remember those rag and bone men? Sometimes they unearth copper alloy dress pins, silver gilt brooch fragments, even a dented spur. Items too tarnished for resale trickle here. Wulfhild melts copper bits into shapeless ingots she hides in clay jars buried by the hearth. Why? Because the Lord's next levy may demand coin she lacks in pennies but owns in scrap weight. One ingot once defended her hay harvest from seizure. She bribed the reeve, who melted it anew into his own hush money lump. Hoarding flows like water. Above your head hang bundles of dried herbs, not the usual sage and thyme, but oddities. Tansy laced with spiderweb, nettle stalks still studded with stingers, onion skins scribbled with charcoal runes. Local herbalists trade these for ingredients too risky to grow openly. Wulfhild experiments nightly, steeping onion skins in whey until the dye curdles into a bruise purple ink. She plans to mark talismans for midsummer, symbols meant to attract swallows, natural flycatchers. If the experiment fails, she'll blend the soured whey into plaster for patching wattle gaps. Nothing wasted. A clatter from below. Someone at the front door. Wulfhild peers through a knothole bored for this purpose. 2 apprentices from the blacksmith's yard clutch a satchel. She descends, motioning you to stay silent. Minutes later, she returns with the bag's contents. Broken arrowheads, scorched and twisted, scavenged from the butts after militia drills. She'll file off barbs, drill holes, and sew them as jingles onto a child's rattle. Village lore claims iron noise frightens night hags. Parents pay well for peace of mind. Firelight crawls low, attic shadows swell. Wolfhild pulls up a floorboard, revealing a crawl space no wider than a hedgehog. Inside, seed coffers, tiny clay pots stopped with wax. Each holds kernels from seasons of bumper harvests. In drought years, villagers raid personal seed stores too soon. Wolfhild's hoard becomes last resort. She lends seeds on oath, return double after harvest, or gift a firstborn chick. Debts tracked by notches on a hazel rod, one rod for each family. She keeps them under her pillow. Some nights she can't sleep for their poking, but she says the discomfort reminds her whose bellies depend on her thrift. To one side, a bundle of parchment scraps flutters, odd shapes cut from court summonses, tax tallies, excommunication drafts. Scribes toss margins. Wolfhild catches them. She folds them into miniature envelopes sealed with birch pitch, perfect for clandestine love notes swapped at solstice dances. Each carries a whiff of authority ink, borrowed gravity that thrills illiterate hearts. She sells them for a farthing apiece, cheaper than risking the priest's wax seal. As dawn spider threads across rafters, inventory continues. Horsehair rope segments too frayed for plow traces now braided into cat toys. Cracked spinning whorls glued atop staves to become loom weights. A length of gutter pipe hammered flat for cooking sheets. Every object waits for the moment when its uselessness flips into salvation. You, lantern sputtering, realize Wolfhild's cottage is less dwelling than living chronicle, a museum where time is refused burial. Medieval hoarding isn't greed, it's rebellion against scarcity, insurance bought with space and dust. Each shelf chants the same refrain, "One day you may need me." And in an age when famine rides behind each mild winter and war gallops after each good harvest, who can argue? If rummaging through Wolfhild's attic arsenal fired your own upcycling imagination, hit subscribe so you never miss another midnight salvage tour. And tell me below, which attic relic in your life deserves a second story? We've promised to trail the rag and bone men on their dawn circuit, and there they are, silhouettes against the pink-gray horizon, carts creaking along the lane that skirts the graveyard. They move quiet as scandal, no bells, no cries, because their trade treads the thin ice between need and sin. In theory, parish law brands any disturbance of consecrated ground a mortal offense. In practice, the church looks away so long as the relic market remains afloat and the churchwarden's palms remain pleasantly greased with copper tokens that never quite make it to the alms chest. Wolfhild steps into their slipstream, carrying a canvas bundle. Inside, 2 crooked scissors, a cracked soapstone spindle whorl, and a fistful of window lead stubs she pried from her attic shield wall. None of it is worth a half farthing on the open market. But in this barter chain, value is alchemy. Broken blades become fish hooks. Lead stubs melt into weights for fishing nets. A spindle whorl grinds pigment for exorcism sigils sold to anxious millers. Everything useless is just one craftsman away from indispensable. Squat with me behind the low yew hedge bordering the graveyard and observe the men at work. They carry grave screws, auger bits welded on to T-handles. With practiced speed, they twist slender holes beside fresh mounds, fishing for coffin hardware. Hear the thunk. An iron loop clinks onto the auger tip.
too deep to expose the body, shallow enough to snag the ring bolt. One twist, two, and a loop as thick as your thumb emerges, lacquered with loam. They'll sell it to a smith who'll hammer it into boot buckles for cavalry boots. War rides on corpses. Wolfhild doesn't touch the iron. Instead, she trades her scissors for a burlap pouch of candle snuff, the furry black cones that grow atop tallow candles left burning too long in the nave. Parish sextons scrape them off to keep the flames pure. Rag and bone men buy the soot for dye makers. Mix it with vinegar and eggshell ash, and you get ink dark enough to stain parchment for 30 winters. Wolfhild's ledger of seed debts has nearly run blank. Tonight, she'll brew fresh ink and etch new notches. We shadow the men onward to the midden heap behind the baker's shop. You'd think garbage reeks, but in a medieval town, the bakery midden smells richer than the Reeve's spice chest. Sourdough starters gone rabid, honey foam scraped from keg rims, scorched rye bricks good only for pig fodder. Scavengers jab with hooked sticks, prying out charcoal lumps still sound enough for blacksmith forges. Wolfhild fishes a single burnt loaf the size of a hedgehog. Once grated and dried, it becomes breadcrumbs, essential for thickening pottage when oats run low. Waste nothing, taste everything. A sudden drizzle needles down. Perfect timing. Rain drives respectable folk indoors, clearing the lane for black market reliquary swaps. Beneath the lich gate, two figures shuffle sacks. One produces a silver locket shaped like a teardrop, enameled chipped. Inside glitters a flake of bone and a parchment sliver, promising it is pulvis de scapula sancti Petri. Genuine? Probably pig cartilage and last year's wax. But rarity isn't measured by truth, it's measured by willingness to hope. A widow buys it with 3 brass candlesticks to ward off Murrin stalking her cattle. When faith is all you have left, you spend it lavishly. Wolfhild acquires from the same trader a bundle of patent fragments, broken saucer-sized discs once used in mass to hold the host. The porcelain edges are razor sharp. She'll grind them into grog to temper clay roof tiles. Church clay is better than riverbank mud. Perhaps the prayers fired into it help tiles shed rain, or so the legend sells. She also pockets the trader's discarded wrapping paper, a sheet of parchment enumerating penances owed by nobles. Blackmail potential? Maybe. For now, it becomes fire starter for her hearth. Our route bends toward the tanner's quarter, where hides soak in urine pits, smoking with caustic fog. Rag and bone men lift dripping pelts, hunting for dropped metal weights or stray knives. Wolfhild gags but stays. She swaps her window lead for scrap alum, the chalky crystals that stiffen leather. She'll grind them with dried egg membranes to create a primitive mordant, setting vegetable dyes into wool cloaks. Come winter, villagers will thank her when rain beads instead of soaking through. Noon approaches. The bone men retreat before sun reveals their trade. Wolfhild's bundle now bulges. We follow her past the mill pond, murmuring with frogs. She kneels at the bank, fishes out waterlogged cedar shavings drifting from the carpenter's shop upstream. Cedar resin discourages woodworm. She dries the shavings on her rafters, then packs them inside coffers of linen to perfume and preserve cloth. Back in her cottage yard, she dumps the haul onto a sorting table. Picture the scene.
Scorched bread loaf steaming in the drizzle. Alum crystals glittering like frost. Paten shards, soot snuff, cedar curls. A lantern cage missing one bar. And a single coffin ring bolt she must have pocketed despite herself. Even Wulfhild, champion of reuse, shudders a moment. Then she ties a ribbon of nettle twine around the ring, hangs it above the goat stall, murmuring a charm that forged iron wardeth wandering spirits. Fear becomes function, alchemy complete. Now she sets about transformations. Bread loaf sliced, toasted on hot slate, crumbled into a clay jar. Alum mortared to powder, mixed with urine in a horn cup to steep. Soot snuff simmered with vinegar, filtered through linen straining bag into a pewter vial. Ink as black as a raven's cry. Paten shards crushed under her nail press hammer, yielding grog grit. Cedar curls strung like garlands across rafters. Nothing remains motionless. Hoarding is kinetic, a continual dance of objects shedding past lives to fit new roles. Evening shadows stretch. The village herald clacks his wooden drum, summoning folk to the green. A rare entertainment, traveling jugglers perform. Wulfhild grabs a pouch of twist coins, old pennies hammered into spirals to serve as spindle whorl replacements. Jugglers adore them for sleight of hand illusions. In exchange, performers toss her a small tin whistle, cracked on one edge. She'll plug the crack with beeswax and gift the whistle to the shepherd's boy, whose reed pipe split in last week's frost. A bauble for a smile, a hidden currency labeled goodwill. Night again cloaks the eaves. Lantern lit, Wulfhild unfurls a fresh hazel rod, incises seed-loan notches with a bone-tipped stylus dipped in her new ink. The ink smells of church smoke and vinegar. Sin forgiven, hope preserved. She stashes the rod under her straw tick. Did debts truly grow tonight? Yes, by 3 families' worth of barley seed promised come harvest. Yet she sleeps easier knowing the numbers lie silent under her spine. Across the cottage, you perch on a stool fashioned from cartwheel spokes and a war helm's dented crown. You've breathed tanner's stench, grave earth musk, midden yeast, and church incense, all in a day's gathering. You understand now, medieval hoarding is not passive gluttony, but active stewardship. Every object absorbed into Wulfhild's orbit acquires new gravity, swinging through uses the way planets chase suns. Scarcity forces creativity. Creativity breeds resilience. Resilience keeps the village pulse beating through famine, plague, and war. Lanterns dims. Goats mumble in sleep. Wulfhild's attic above creaks as wind tests the resin-sealed shingles. They hold. Somewhere in the tunnels beneath, a spoiled ale barrel detonates with a hollow boom, its echo swallowed by peat. She barely stirs. Her hoard bends, but never snaps. Lean in close, because the candle is sputtering, and the hourglass is bleeding its last grain of gray sand. By morning light, Wulfhild's door will swing on a silent hinge, pushed by hands that don't yet know they're thieves and stewards. So pinch the wick, hush the goat, and follow the sigh that leaves her lungs one final time. She dies the way a dovecote empties at dusk, quietly,
feathers adrift, work unfinished but inevitable. No plague or feud, just the body closing shop after decades of night markets and barter circuits. She is 48, ancient for a peasant woman. Even death seems polite, waiting at the threshold until her last ledger notch is inked. The rooster hasn't crowed yet when the midwife turned layer out, lights a rush dip and crosses herself. She threads a strip of flax through Wulfhild's fingers, the price of a soul sleeve in purgatory, and ties it with 3 knots: faith, hope, charity. Find me in the shadow by the hearth, because we're here to chart the migration of the Horde the moment its gravity well collapses. Everything she stored, saved, scrounged, and reforged will now obey new physics, flying outward into lives that never knew her name. A supernova of junk and providence. First to arrive is the reeve, sleeve buttons undone, as if grief grants informality. He records her estate on a wax tablet. 1 goat, 2 hens, 12 roof tiles spare, 5 jars of crumb, 3 of piss-steeped alum paste, 7 hazel debt rods, 2 broken-sounding whistles, and an iron ring bolt ribboned like a saint medal. Legally, the goat passes to the manor lord for relief, but the reeve hates paperwork, so he trades it on the spot to the vintner's widow for a cup of last year's perry and half a candle. The goat is led bleating across the green before Wulfhild's eyes have cooled. Next, slip through the door the rag and bone men, faces solemn but palms itching. They lift her cedar-perfumed roof tiles, weighing them like loaves of rye. By noon, the tiles rest on the Guildhall porch, resold for twice their worth to patch a leaky bell tower. Every time the bell tolls henceforth, a tremor of Wulfhild's attic echoes across the shire. A ghostly resonance no ear discerns, but every heart records. Meanwhile, the midwife pockets the soot ink vial. She has a sideline copying protective charms onto crib slats. Her sales pitch: ink brewed from candle prayer and vinegar holds demons at bay. This batch outsells all previous. Within weeks, half the newborns in 3 parishes sleep beneath Wulfhild's recycled midnight. Mothers swear the infants cry less. Belief is the strongest narcotic. The alum paste barrel travels by cart to the river dye works. The dyer stirs it into a cauldron, sets a batch of coarse wool, produces a blue so vivid that merchants from York think it wode smuggled tax-free across the border. They pay a premium, load bolts onto pack horses, and somewhere on the northern road, a bandit attack spills the cloth into mud. A shepherd's daughter rescues a scrap, sews it into a doll's cape, her first needlework. In 40 years, she'll be a famed tapestry weaver, citing a miracle rag as her awakening. Let's tag along with the patent grog. The potter mixes the shard grit into clay roof finials shaped like dragons' heads, commissions by the abbot for the new chapter house. When the masons set them on the ridge beam, rain hits and slides away like confession. Monks call it God's spit-shine. Masons chalk it to church mud. None speak Wulfhild's name. Yet each time a novice hears the finial sing, the wind makes them whistle at dusk, he attributes the music to angels. The breadcrumb jar passes to the Manor cook, who sprinkles the bits over spiced eel pies for the harvest feast. 1 crumb lodges beneath the molar of Sir Aldwyn, a knight famed for laughter and lousy dice throws. An abscess forms, his jaw swells. The surgeon lances it with a red-hot spoon. Aldwin survives, but forsakes gambling. He invests his purse instead in a bridge over the marsh road, saving a dozen cartwheels a year from drowning. You could say Wulfhild's bread built that bridge. Now consider the coffin ring bolt. The superstitious reeve refuses to touch iron ripped from the dead, so it lands with the gravedigger's daughter, Merowyn, who braids the nettle ribbon into her hair for luck. When archers recruit peasant girls to carry arrows at the next mustering, the captain chooses Merowyn, red ribbon, keen eyes. She marches, survives, marries a bowyer, raises 5 children who all shoot straighter than their father. Whole bloodlines pivot on such talismans. Remember the tin whistle with the wax-plugged crack? The shepherd's boy loses it one spring dawn, searching for a lamb. A traveling friar finds the whistle, cleans it, and in his boredom learns a tune unknown in any hymnal. He plays it at inns for alms. The melody spreads along pilgrim roads until minstrels claim it as the lament of the wandering ewe. Centuries later, a musicologist will puzzle over its origin amidst cathedral archives, never suspecting a whiff of cedar hoard inside each note. The cedar curls themselves? As the cottage empties, the midwife sweeps them into her apron. She swaps them with a charcoaler for a pouch of hazelnuts. The charcoaler throws the curls atop a dying kiln. The resin imbues the charcoal with a sweet smoke that flavors a batch of barley malt. That malt becomes ale served at the Whitsun Fair, where 2 rival reeves settle a boundary dispute over shared tankards. Thus a treaty fermented in cedar smoke. We cannot omit the 7 hazel debt rods. The parish priest claims them, citing spiritual oversight of worldly obligations. He studies each notch by candle splutter, cross-referencing the tally against memory. Some debts are paid, some owed him, some inscrutable. Unable to square the math, he burns the rods in the Easter fire to balance all ledgers in Christ. Ashes swirl, land on the baptismal font, and a baby christened that morn shares a fingertip of carbon with every debtor. Collective forgiveness, courtesy of confusion. What of Wulfhild's straw tick stuffed with thistledown and cedar dust? The midwife donates it to the almshouse. A gout-stricken veteran sleeps on it, dreams of marching again without pain. He wakes convinced the straw contains healing relics, tells every crippled beggar from here to Durham. Soon, pilgrims detour to nap on the miracle mattress for a penny each, funding repairs to the almshouse roof for an entire decade. Let's jump to France, because ripples cross seas. A Flemish cloth merchant purchases one of the York blue bolts. He lines a bridal trunk with it, ships it to Rouen, dowry for his sister. Her husband, a parchment mill owner, packs the trunk with vellum scraps for ballast. At port, dock workers pilfer the scraps, sell them to scribes, and one sheet becomes the flyleaf of a physician's treatise on night air fevers. 300 years later, scholars cite that flyleaf to trace the spread of plague along trade routes, all because soot ink led to alum dye, led to woadless blue, led to marriage, led to paper ballast. Hoard logic obeys no border. Pause. Breathe. And pan back to the cottage shell. 2 seasons pass. Rains wear grooves in the threshold. Nettles claim the yard. But one spring, the blacksmith's widow, Tamsin, buys the empty dwelling for a song. Literally, 2 verses sung at the reeve's eldest son's wedding. She pries loose floorboards and discovers cedar curls still fragrant. She grinds them into oil salve for treating iron blight, halting the spread of rust on plowshares. The village yield that year rebounds. Seed granaries fill. Tamsin never learns the curl's provenance. Over time, Wulfhild's name fades from tithe rolls. Her headstone tilts, but her hoard keeps migrating. We could chase each atom forever. Soot swirling into upper church murals, alum dust washing into rivers, cedar oil perfuming a knight's saddle. Instead, step outside the timeline and examine the principle. Scarcity cultures metamorphosis. Object trajectories outlive owners. Modern landfills freeze wealth in amber. Medieval hoards spun it like thread through generations. You, dear listener, still awake? Touch the device in your hand. Within its circuitry hum rare earths that once lay under Chinese mountains. Tomorrow, the model ages out. Maybe you'll trade it, maybe it sinks in a drawer. One day, its copper veins may line solar panels powering a refugee clinic. Your digital hoard will echo, too, if allowed. So, as the cock crows and the final shard of Wulfhild's life feeds the world, ask yourself, what in your pocket could nourish strangers a century hence? Drop thoughts in the comments. Best Vision earns a shout-out next episode. If this 7-act rummage through medieval upcycling sparked a flicker of wonder, tap subscribe so the algorithm keeps our lantern bright, and share the video with that one friend who thinks zero waste was invented last Tuesday. History laughs and teaches. And with that, we lower the cellar hatch one last time. May every broken thing you meet whisper a second story before it's gone. Sleep well amid the rustle of future hoards.